Hey, it's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb riffing on Sunday afternoon, July 9th, 2023, at approximately 1:15 p.m. my time. And, maybe it's because it's Sunday, this is a sermon from the Mount. But I'm still in this really wild state, considering the shocking news that I received on Friday that had been pretty much, I don't know, jamming me up, throwing me for a loop, making my mind go crazy over the course of previous 6 weeks or so. Maybe the previous 8 weeks, I think, would be more accurate. And I thought the con was going to go away for history and be erased from history and everything that meant. And I happened to drop a truth bomb on this on Friday, so if you happen to see it, you know where I'm coming from. But it's not, and it's now available for free, which I have, I don't know, kind of conflicting emotional sort of issues about that, and I'll touch down upon that a little bit later in the body of this truth bomb. But actually, I'm not completed. I'm incredibly grateful and incredibly happy, and I'm hoping that this is going to be something that makes a profound difference. But I don't think it's going to make a profound difference unless somehow, some way, myself and those of whom I work with closely on an ongoing basis find a way to trigger the epiphany in to tens of thousands and then eventually hundreds of thousands and hopefully millions of people to come to the extraordinary work that we've laid out there that is now available for free at www.thecon.tv. But to kind of put it into perspective, I think that what I want to talk about today is that I think it's, unless you live under a rock, but particularly if you're on Twitter, you can't help but see the sort of incredible energy and just whatever the algorithms are feeding us, just an immense amount of traffic. And there always has been conservative and Trump-like traffic and other bad things that have come with that since Elon Musk took over the helm of Twitter. But now it's like next level. And happened to last night as I was, just going through my, sort of routine, checking out social media and research and listening to what people are saying and trying to vectoring a lot of the information that I have to thread the needle in between what a lot of people out there are listening to and paying attention to. I'm watching the UFC stuff last night, which I have a great deal of interest and respect for. In some ways, what I'm about to say reminded me a little bit of the time period, really about a decade ago, when the kind of the top guy at the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon, and Donald Trump did a bunch of screwy kind of silly stuff back in the day. But it kind of had that feel, but it's definitely next level. So Donald Trump enters the T-Mobile Arena before this big fight last night, and he's led in by Dana White, the CEO of MMA, sorry, and the crowd's going crazy. And if that weren't enough to stomach, you see this sort of like kiss the ring scenario by some of the the fighters in the ring, and then ultimately the ESPN announcers were kind of like showering praise in kind of a peculiar, odd way about Donald Trump being there. And this is in addition to what we've seen, this incredible craziness in a myriad of places with Donald Trump being on this kind of what I would refer to as the zombie apocalypse world tour. But starting right before July 4th in South Carolina, I think he landed in Vegas yesterday. Of course, he did MMA. And he's greeted on the tarmac by all of these state police. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second. This is the guy, as the former president, that created or played his role in the insurrection. I certainly don't believe he spearheaded anything. I think he's a wag the dog, read the script guy that's going to work his angle for himself, in addition to what other people want that are willing to pay for it. And I think that all is on full display with what we're in the midst of. But it's almost like I don't want to compare it to, when the Pope visited the United States on several occasions in my life, but it was a big deal, and people would come out en masse, and it kind of feels like, yeah, there are a lot of people not afraid to show their support for Donald Trump, and that's MAGA Nation, and here he is being legitimized by state police as well as a network. And the guy led an insurrection, supposedly. Okay, again, he's deeply involved with the insurrection and everything else, and the 7,000 lies and the 60 plus indictments and everything else that we don't know about and everything we can actually see and everything that means, and the broader scope of independent sort of media shock jocks trying to interpret what he may mean in the everybody just wants to talk about what's in front of him, and Donald Trump has been generating a lot of attention, and yet all of these people, for example, the state police, as far as I'm concerned, they're aiding and abetting a criminal, which means they should all be held accountable, especially if he's convicted. But then my biggest beef, as it has been for now close to, well, if we go back at least the last 12, 13 years, right, in terms of this analogy, my biggest beef at the moment is with Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States and the Department of Justice, considering everything that we have seen over and over and over for the last several years. And Donald Trump is walking around like he walks on water and is above the law, because the law has not dropped the hammer on Trump, even though it's incredibly obvious that it should have long before he became the president of the United States. But okay, put that aside for the moment and realize that everything that Donald Trump has done is just basically shoving the idea that the entirety of the law does not challenge you if you're above the law, which means we don't live in the United States, which means everything that I've been telling you from, for now the last year and a half, approaching 2 years, I guess, when we get to December or January, has been exactly right. And so when you put together the revelation that we have now made the con available for free, in context to all of you who are you kidding me about MAGA and Trump and everything else, you've got to come to the revelation and the understanding that the entire system is insanely corrupt, and it's corrupt based on the ways that we lay out and introduce you step by step in the con. Once again, free at www.thecon, for a crime that basically destroyed 100 million plus people, that led to a global meltdown that emanated from a $4.5 trillion wipeout in the housing industry based on an insane diabolical scheme of deceptive acts and practices and what we call liar's loans that created gazillions of dollars, really technically 600 to 800 trillion dollars worth of toxic securities and derivatives that were manifested all over the world, that blew up the world, that then ultimately led to these insane revelations that I provide you, that takes you to the ultimate revelation that I'll get to in a moment. But I wanted to use that as kind of an entry point, because I know that there are millions of you that are just aghast and flabbergasted and like, this is insanity, and you don't have a lot of faith in the Democratic sort of response in the Biden administration. I mean, many of you do, and Biden's a decent guy. Biden's been around for decades and decades. He's part of the machine. He's not a threat to the machine. He's a guy that gives us the sort of false hope that things are real, and that here's a government that actually has empathy and really wants to champion justice and dignity for everyone, including the hot button issues of trans and, of course, woman's right to choose and all of those kinds of things. But yet falling far, far, far short. But there's a methodology of the actual sort of funding mechanisms and who's funding those mechanisms for the Democratic Party that are insanely problematic, but at the same time insanely corrupt. Slightly different than what's happening on the right, but the right is insanely corrupt as well. And you see a lot of times in social media that people are like, you know what, I've had enough of both. And there's no difference between the Democrats or the Republicans or Biden and Trump, and there's gazillions of differences for one. But then they kind of just throw their hat in the ring and they just back off and put their hands up like, I'm done. There's nothing I can do. Because they don't understand what's going on. And it's not true to create, it's a false equivalency to compare the Democrats and their corruption and Biden with the brand of Donald Trump corruption in what I'd call the new Confederacy with the Republicans. They're different, but at the same time, oh yeah, they're all corrupt. And by the way, they all do feed from the same trough. which I'll get to in a moment. But I think it's a great lead in to the awareness of what occurred to me after I had another conversation this morning. And I frequently get reached out to by people all over the country that will discover me in our work, and maybe they'll see a blog, or they'll see a tweet, or maybe they'll catch me on YouTube, and they'll want to tell me their story. And so that just happened over the course of the last week and a half with a guy out of New Jersey who is a veteran, and a disabled veteran at that. And he reached a pretty high level within the Navy, served all over the world, and he found himself in the trap that we continue to reveal, that tens of millions of people found themselves on the wrong end of. And he suddenly discovered it, or at least what he thinks is the crime of the cover-up that involves the courts. And he literally thought he was the only guy that knew this stuff. Meanwhile, I've been trumpeting this for I don't know how long. I've had a podcast, for example, with our friends from the Real Progressives that we call the New Untouchables, that lays out 19 episodes of this. I've shown over and over and over, and this is really problematic for me as well, because I have over 300 hours on the shelf for what was basically designed to be season 2 of the con, that was going to reveal the insane amount of evidence that we have of documentation fraud, to the tunes in our own possession of hundreds of thousands of pieces of documentation fraud that were used in illegal foreclosures by a corrupt to the gills judiciary all around the United States, and almost literally so many states I have access to. But I have hundreds of thousands of pieces of evidence of foreclosure fraud that goes through this network of servicers and foreclosure mills and the judiciary, and I've got every piece of it, and I deal closely, among other attorneys, but one in particular, a guy named Bruce Jacobs, who has carried this mantle, to the ends of the earth, and just sacrificed his entire career. In fact, he got disbarred officially on Friday, which is incredibly sad and horrific and problematic. And I've got to get him on the phone, and I'm hopefully going to do a podcast with him this week. But, I've got all this information in addition to the thousands of hours that we've laid out there between the con and our podcast, and Truth, Deception Owns You, and all of the other things that are available on our YouTube channel at Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con, on TikTok and everything else. Anyway, this guy discovers me, wants to tell me what he knows, and he literally thinks he's the first guy to discover this. Now, I have all the empathy in the world for what he's going through, and it's horrific. And I had to lay out for him earlier this morning all of the things that I've been involved with for a very long time, and what we have, which includes in the con at www.thecon.tv, all of the testimony from the top whistleblowers at the top financial institutions of the United States, plus all of the insiders at the highest levels of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and oh yeah, AGs around the country. And oh yeah, by the way, we discovered the only RICO conviction that should have taken down the entirety of Wall Street. But of course it didn't, because we're that corrupt, which led to everything that I'm still pushing slightly in this truth bomb, which I've said a million times over, which leads us directly to the Federal Reserve. I'll come back to that. So during the dialogue with this person who reached out to me, I had to walk him through that, and it suddenly clicked, and he's like, "Oh my God, I didn't know that. I had no idea. I had no idea that millions of people knew this. I had no idea of your work. I had no idea that you've got all of these things and then some. And wow, you just solved the riddle for me, because those are some of those questions were the questions I've been asking and trying to find answers to that I didn't have answers to. And you do? Oh my God." And it's like, he's one of probably millions of people in the same situation, asking questions, going, what the fuck's going on? And yet here I am, with what I call hashtag the $29 trillion truth, which is literally the $70 trillion truth. And I'll push that down slightly to the end of this podcast, vlogcast, or whatever we call it when you have a video podcast. And which is just, truth bomb riffing on YouTube. But at the same time, it's like, by the way, can you subscribe? Please share. For those of you who keep coming back, we need to grow this to literally millions of people as fast as possible, so that I don't have a continuation of what I just demonstrated with this person from New Jersey, who's a Navy veteran, disabled, going through the hell of being, ripped, bulldozed in the courts, and he can't do anything about it because nobody's listening, and he doesn't have, the means to, quite frankly, do what we did. Which I'll remind you, at the moment, we spent $4.5 million to crisscross this country, I don't know, 15, 20 times to get aggregate all of the information and the evidence to be able to cross our T's and dot our I's to get past all of the legal ramifications of not being sued, because we show you, who did what, when, and how, and who covered it up, which includes your government. And probably more dangerously to our efforts, it's at least those who could sue the living hell out of us in their institutions, are the CEOs of Wall Street, who run the largest banks in the world, and or some of the largest banks in the world. But the bottom line is, do they have corporate resources and legal counsel that could sue us into oblivion based on libel if we had this thing wrong? Of course they could. That's why I had to spend so much money. We had to spend so much money, and we had to go through so much insane sacrifice and effort to pull off the miracle. And again, I'll put this into context to what the government's supposed to do. The sum total of our institutions, between the Department of Justice and the FBI and the SEC and all manner, shape, or form of regulatory bodies, and then others, including AGs. I mean, these guys operate on the federal level to the tune of budgets over $90 billion a year. And they failed to get you the information that I've laid out on a platinum platter, that we spent $4.5 million to get the $29 trillion truth that affected over 100 million people, that we're now giving you for free, which answers everything that goes back to the insanity of what we're dealing with MAGA, because corruption births and fuels fascism. We've normalized this shit, just like CNN had a town hall with Trump in the same situation. Or Fox, for example, got nailed for a $787 million settlement because they're a platform of lies that they've admitted to under oath in the courts, that only, a company with deep pockets, Dominion in this case, voting booths, took it to them and basically could have made it a lot worse. And so they settled. But really, what's $787 million to an outfit like, Fox Corp, or I should say News Corp and Fox Media? I think their operating revenue last year was $14.7 billion. Their profit margins, I think, were in the $4 billion range last year. So yeah, $787 million is a big hit, probably to bonuses and everything else. But we're talking about 1 year of profits, which would be less than a third, right? What am I talking about? Well, let's just call it somewhere in the vicinity of less than 17%-ish. Of their operating profit margin for 2022. Okay, yeah. How much is Rupert Murdoch worth? Oh, billions, right? He could have single-handedly stroked a check from his personal wealth. But you know what? Let the corporation and their stockholders take the hit, and he'll have complete control, and more lies to come, because lies pay. That's the sum total of the media. The profit motive is now deception, tweaked to a specific audience because of the challenge completely from online, first and foremost. And online independent media is doing the exact same thing in a slightly, I shouldn't say an exact same way, it's slightly different, but similar methodology. But getting back to my point. So Donald Trump makes the grand entrance. He's legitimized by media and law enforcement, which is really just a step into autocracy, which is what all dictators do. And then ultimately, I'm revealing to you that the entirety of media is a lie based on their own self-proclamation. And here is a veteran Navy disabled vet that suddenly his jaw's hitting the ground because of the information I'm giving to him. And he's like, what? You did what? Yeah. And that's what we're dealing with. I mean, the Orwellian sort of sci-fi, plastic sort of, mechanism membrane that prevents this truth from getting to the millions of people that need to hear it, when the entire system is a lie, is what we're all dealing with. So further to that, this morning, I came across, and yesterday afternoon too, but I think these are two extremely important points. So just on my feed on YouTube, I came across, in fact, I'm gonna look at it while I'm riffing right now, but I came across this interview on Bill Moyers, brilliantly, because that's where I found Bill Black, But he was interviewing a gentleman who is a guy by the name of, let's just look at this and I'll put this on pause. And this occurred 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Mike Lofgren, a congressional staff member for 28 years, and he revealed Washington's deep state. And he did so brilliantly and poetically, and he just basically, gave a face to what the deep state is. And, interestingly, since, let's call it Q, and the rise of the deep state phenomenon and paranoia within the right, obviously the sort of status quo has been able to marginalize the notion of conspiracy theorists or conspiracy and kind of like, dismiss it altogether. And yet, of course, deep state is exactly what runs the show because of just the nature of corporations and its hybrid, structure with finance, which is Wall Street, and then ultimately, military industrial state and technology state, which are in complete control. And especially when you understand the revolving door and interests of all of these different lobbyists and these power structures and these verticals that also are outside of the aforementioned, but that include, the likes of big agriculture, big pharma, and, probably infrastructure and all sorts of things. I mean, there's this revolving door, and there always has been. That makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But when you consider what we revealed to you in the con, you understand how if the law isn't integral to holding power to account, then you wind up with an absolute disaster, which is exactly what we've been living in and what I've been revealing to you for the past X amount of years based on my journey of over a decade in massive sacrifice and commitment of resources and miracles that were able to pull it all together in a way that I've recently had an Academy member, for example, say to us when he watched The Con, this thing should have won an Academy Award. How is it that nobody has ever seen this? Oh my God, I'll never see anything again the same way. Yeah, it's like John Carpenter's They Live when you put the sunglasses on and can you chew bubble gum and kick ass at the same time? I mean, that's what this is. Whether it's 60 Minutes, who does great work from time to time, but they don't do comprehensive work, and there's a reason for that. Whether it's network news nightly, okay, there's formats. There's like 5-minute things that reflect whatever's going on in the moment. That's not deep dive. And then you have everything that happens online where, in some places there's incredible analysis from experts that, allow us to get an insight into some subject. And yeah, it's incredible. But then as many truthsayers and, deep dive revelations that may exist online, so too to all the disinformation and everything else. And, I was thinking about this last night, that have you ever noticed that those that are the professionals in the system that have been giving us dire warnings of, everything from extinction to, climate change and everything that, we're in desperate straits of, that they politely give us this information and nobody listens. Meanwhile, Donald Trump can walk into T-Mobile Arena during a MMA match and be met with thunderous applause and people standing ovation, and announcers for a network, a publicly traded network, that operate, and they used to operate by certain standards, are basically, gloating over Trump, a guy that is literally under investigation for, among other things, an overthrow of our democracy. So as I'm going through this Mike Lofgren interview from 10 years ago, and he's basically, weaving together what exactly the hybrid power is in terms of his definition of deep state and how it operates, which was brilliant and which was 10 years ago. And then you put that construct in context now. And then another thing I happened to listen to this morning, which was an incredible interview with RFK on Lex Friedman on YouTube, of course, right? Probably on a myriad of other platforms. But RFK, for better or for worse, to me, comes across as a guy that is incredibly knowledgeable of a lot of things, incredibly thoughtful. I might disagree with him on some things. I might adamantly disagree with him on others. I might not have enough information on some of what seem to be his sort of marquee positions, whether they happen to equate to big pharma and, of course, vaccines and mistakes that he's been involved with. I don't know how many trials regarding these as an attorney, a defense attorney and so forth, bringing lawsuits against big pharma. But in this particular conversation, two things that really, really stood out to me that I thought were epically important to understand is, first, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has an extraordinary grasp of geopolitics and history, first and foremost. And I think his understanding of how things work and the way he positions things, even though I don't completely agree with him on his position on all things Ukraine and Russia, I certainly have the same come from to have the respect and the awe of the former Soviet Union and its incredible sacrifice to defeat the Nazis and what that means in context to everything, not to mention obviously their nuclear arsenal and all of the other things that you have to think of as a leader of the, one of the most powerful countries on earth, if not the most powerful country on earth, but in terms of your leadership and everything else, he seems to me to have a really fabulous grasp of all of the right elements to at least consider what policy would become. And, further to that, though, the thing that I really pay attention to as it relates to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is his knowledge of the CIA and what he's saying about the CIA. But one thing in particularly really stood out to me. He said that the CIA is the largest funder of journalism around the world. And I thought to myself, holy shit, does that make sense? Now, what you've got to understand, the other side of what that means, if you understand what the CIA's role is and what the CIA's position is within the hive of power, and what the history of the CIA is, to think of the CIA being the largest owner of information in journalism throughout the world is insane and shocking. But the other side of it is, and this is what Bobby Kennedy had also stated, and I'm curious to what level he's correct or what he knows and how he knows it and all of those sorts of things in terms of the details. But, what I know in terms of American journalism, especially print journalism, is that hedge funds have bought newspapers throughout the United States for the last 20 years. So if you put those two things together, particularly with the acknowledgement of what the deep state is by this guy Mike Lofgren, which is a hybrid between financialized power, our financial system, and then deep power like military, industrial state, and technology, that they're at the apex of all this and what it works for and why. And then you put on top of that the expression of the CIA owning journalism and then hedge funds owning, and asset managers, quite frankly, media, and given the shit show of media and everything I said at the front, all of these are the reasons why A, I had to make the con, and B, why it's insanely incredible and important that millions of people see it, especially now that we have provided it for free at www.thecon.tv. And then finally, look, all of this is in service. I feel absolutely horrible, to be honest with you, that my partner, who I no longer talk to, just kind of, just gave up and said, okay, fine, it's free. I mean, in some ways, I think it's just extremely heroic, and I think it's incredibly important. But I'm a producer. I got paid to produce the con. I sold him an investment in the con based on the fact that I knew that there were tens of millions of people who got destroyed by the 2008 financial crisis, and I knew something was wrong in Dodge, and I had to find the answers. I became obsessed, kind of like, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when Richard Dreyfuss and everybody else wound up making these devil towers in their kitchen because they all got the freaking message. I'm like that in the world, quite frankly, with a lot of other people that know the courts are corrupt and they've got all sorts of evidence and all manner shape of fighting this insane corruption. But that's what happened originally. And I got the opportunity because I talked to the right guy who wanted to find out how the nation went of, by, and for the people to become of, by, and for the corruption. That's what he invested in. And I sold him. I said, look, there's tens of millions of people. You make this available, and we priced this thing to move, even though we had to do it on our own through a self-distribution, even though we were on all the platforms like Amazon Prime and Apple TV and Microsoft Network and so forth. And given the amount of people that this happened to, even if, and we only charge for the entire series, I think it was $10 for the whole series. That's $2 an episode. Everybody can afford that, even if they're in deep, dire straits to get the truth of what destroyed their life, especially if they're fighting for their lives in the courts, because we gave you the information that could make you legitimate in the courts to fight back, to actually win, especially if tens of millions of us came together. So yeah, the profit motive is involved, but just from a matter of just everybody's got to pay for something. I don't go to the grocery store and get food for free. I don't go to the hardware store and buy stuff that I've got to work on for free. We all know that. We are a country where you got to buy what you need, and there's great buys in it. So from where I'm standing as a producer, I have always been a capitalist, but I believe in a creative collaboration and fairness, and you take the risk as a producer and you put it out to the world, and if millions of you see it, I mean, how many of you want to go get money back from Michael Moore? The guy's made hundreds of millions of dollars over the years because, he made documentaries that people paid admission to. There's nothing wrong with that. But we got to the point in this over-deluged scenario of lies and deception in this thunderous, maniacal MAGA that is growing out of the corruption that I've revealed to you, that nobody can see the forest for the trees. And the only thing that makes money, as demonstrated by Fox and its $687 million make Dominion go away revelation, that there is a shit ton of money in lies. I could have gone on this journey and I should have said, hey, instead of spending $4.5 million to get the truth, why don't we spend about $1 million, put together a bunch of fucking lies, blame the wrong guys, and then, build a campaign against it to where we get conformity and everybody buys lies. And then we would have probably made tens of millions of dollars. But the truth has no value. So we let it out there for free, even though we did what the $90 billion apparatus of the government couldn't do. And of course, we now all understand that the Supreme Court, among other things, is corrupt. And so what I'm doing, and this is now in a nonprofit way, but I've got hundreds of hours on the shelves that has even more detail and more revelations than we could put in the first 5 episodes of the con, but you can't understand what happened in the aftermath of the con unless you understand what it created the con, which when you put two together, it creates what we're in the midst of. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to live under an autocratic, white supremacist, fascist fucking movement? Or the opposite, which is really not the opposite, which is the counter to that, is a robber baron corrupt state that has complete control of the Federal Reserve. Because right now, those are your two options. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption, to create a dynamic and a massive, exodus from corruption to an incredible, resurrection of the American dream for the middle class, based on the integrity of law, based on decency and integrity. Because integrity of the law is the only way you and I and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi can find liberty. And we've got to create sustainability. That's the other side of this. So everything that I'm doing is to try to create a new deal. And what I'm asking you to consider is investing $13 into a mass movement equipped with the truth to purge the lies, to drown fascism, to create tens of millions of people that can be seen with the truth that the media can no longer hide. And the way we're going to do that is twofold. I'm going to build this podcast. I'm doing it. I've got incredible guests on the horizon, and I would like you to consider maybe taking money, if you can't afford it, away from your subscription to something that's hiding this information, and give it to somebody who's giving you the truth. But I think most of you can afford a one-time payment of $13 in the honor, in the sort of forward movement of what our country was founded upon. The principles of separation of powers and, of course, the integrity of law. which I'm going to manifest into the Clean New Deal. And I don't want to give you a massive history lesson of the progressive movements from Teddy Roosevelt through FDR and the New Deal and everything that created that scenario. We're right back to square with that whole situation, and we're in the midst of it all, quite frankly, because you've got, again, the corrupt new robber barons versus the corrupt new Confederacy. 1,300 of you, even though, and this is not a throwaway. I mean, look, we've already had, I don't know, what are we up to? I don't know, 50, 60 contributors. I think we've gotten like $1,500, more like $3,500. But we got to get to like 20,000 to be able to pay crew to be able to do the podcast. But I want to get to a point where this grows and grows and grows and grows. And we get to a point where we have a war chest of $169 million or more to basically do twofold. One, I got to create a Lollapalooza revival barnstorming tour where we get millions of people together and aggregated in big cities across the United States, all the way on this tour next summer through the fall, that basically reveals these truths that I have, that reveal it all, that everybody is hiding from. And again, to give you an example of what Bobby Kennedy said, he's like, yeah, his whole thing is pharmaceutical fraud. They're the big boys of, criminality. And it's like, and then he starts to describe everything he's been involved with for decades, quite frankly, with everything involved with vaccines and so on and so forth. He's like, he says that they've been sued $35 billion was his number, to make the point that they're the big boys on the block. Meanwhile, what I'm giving you, the too big to fail banks paid $250 billion to suppress everything that I'm telling you, which they got $29 trillion in 2009 illegally, because of everything I'm telling you through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which is MMT for the mob, and ultimately, then we provided quantitative easing. I mean, that was just in 2009. By the time we get to 2019, and that's not to mention 0% interest, and of course the securitization of all of these bonds, especially the commercial real estate that's about to blow up now, that were purchased by the Fed through quantitative easing, which is in socialism for the rich. And of course, you think Donald Trump's revealing that? Of course not. Donald Trump's not against socialism as long as he can pocket from it. And Donald Trump isn't against war as long as he can pocket from it. As long as he's laundering money for Russia and the Saudis and everybody else, oh yeah, he doesn't want war. He wants to sell them arms. I mean, how stupid can you be? Do you want to live in a country of, by, and for the people, where liberty and justice for all matters? Well, the only way that can happen is with the integrity of the system, and the only way that can happen is if tens of millions of you join us to purge corruption and usher in the Clean New Deal. This is way longer than I wanted to do this morning. God damn, I always get into these things and I'm like, I want to do this for 5 minutes. And then it turns into sometimes 30 minutes, an hour, and sometimes I'm like, nobody's going to watch this. Look, if you made it to the end, thank you. Please like and subscribe. Please comment. Please invest. And please share, more importantly. And also, we're going to create a soon, and I'll let everybody know about this because I've had a lot of you ping me on Twitter specifically, but we're going to do a Twitter Spaces. And I know there's a lot of you out there that are trying to create different sorts of movements that are kind of like what I'm saying, but you don't have this information. And I'm more than happy to entertain the notion where we all come together and we all talk about what we think are the solutions, but you've got to understand the revelations of what we have. And I highly, highly, highly encourage you to go right now. Don't wait. Go right now to www.thecon.tv. All you got to do is sign in, provide your information, and you can watch it for free. That's your ticket to admission. Because of stuff that's coming down the pike, and I'm not involved with that, but it's, you know what, you're not going to be put on any secret mailing list. We're building an audience for what comes next, even though I'm not a part of that part of it. I don't even know what that means. The bottom line is that I am going to work with you because you plus me equals we the people, and we've got the answers that can save ourselves, the country, the world, and literally everything. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like this guy who was on the Academy who said to me, why didn't millions of people see this? Why wasn't this nominated for an Academy Award? And why, or I can't do anything without seeing this. Your entire view changes when you understand what the truth is. And I know there's millions of you who will not sit idly by while our country is overwhelmed with the lobotomized zombie apocalypse of people that are so stupid that they would follow Donald Trump to the ends of the earth and jump off the cliff like a Jonestown massacre. Should any of us be surprised? I mean, we've had Christian fascism in this country for a very long time. There has been that undercurrent probably the whole time. And here we are in 2023, going back 100 years. Are you okay with that? I know you're not. So why are you sitting on the sidelines twiddling your thumbs? Get involved. Get involved with us. Join us. Share. Please understand what we have. Watch the con. The entire world, it depends on it. I'm not kidding. We're running out of time. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards.